So, the Secretary of State, a man who spent 14 years sitting on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee demanding that administrations talk with Congress before military action, is now explaining why he can't talk with Congress before military action because Congress leaks, even though he admits the operation leaked anyway from a Defense Department contractor. And somehow this is supposed to justify not telling the 8 people in Congress who have literally never leaked anything in the history of the Gang of 8. They call this operational security. So, Rubio appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the same committee where he sat for 14 years, to defend the Trump administration's decision to launch a military operation in Venezuela that captured President Nicolas Maduro without talking to Congress first, and Senator Chris Coons is not having it. Coons just led a bipartisan group to Denmark where they heard from our NATO allies about how Trump's threats to take Greenland and his comments claiming NATO troops stayed a little back from the front lines in Afghanistan have completely broken trust in the United States. And now, he's watching Rubio defend skipping Congress on Venezuela using the exact arguments Rubio used to attack when he was a senator. Watch what happened, and I will give you my take at the end.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Good to be with you again. My basic question is, what are we doing here? What is the point? What is the goal of this hearing?
How do I know?
As you know well, having served on this dais alongside me for 14 years, this is an oversight hearing. And the point, the purpose of oversight is to encourage, if necessary, to compel consultation between the administration and Congress. And I just wanted to raise with you at the outset, of course the Commander-in-Chief has, under Article 2, the power to defend the American people against an imminent threat or an incoming attack. How else could we be kept safe? But our Article 1 power requires consultation. I'll agree with all of my colleagues. Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy. He was indicted. There was a bounty on his head over several administrations. His removal, flawlessly executed by American troops, thankfully none of them hurt, did cost the lives of 75 to 100 Venezuelans and Cubans, was a dangerous and high-risk maneuver. I am glad that it ended as well as it possibly could. But the point here that I want to make first is that it was rehearsed for months. The administration had a number of contingencies it was trying to navigate through. But over the course of months, when the administration was taking strike after strike after strike against drug trafficking boats, in several instances where senior leaders of the administration briefed this committee and others, we were told that military action to remove Maduro was not on the table, that the campaign to try and deter drug trafficking was not going to include the exact military action that followed. Yet it was being rehearsed. If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And consulting with Congress is not just some high-minded principle, not some abstract thing, not a nice to have. It's a got to have. And look, the chairman opened by saying that this was limited in scope and duration, that it was executed flawlessly, and we should all be happy about the result. That much I agree with. But our president continues to threaten Delcy Rodriguez and the remnant of the Maduro regime with military force if they don't comply. We should know what are the policies, what is the path, what is the plan forward. You and I both know the long and painful history of wars that began and seemed to be resolved and then opened up into excruciating, expensive, years-long conflicts. In Iraq in particular, in Libya and elsewhere, things do not always go as planned. And so consultation with Congress that is truthful and forthcoming and transparent is critical. In your service in this body, you knew that, you experienced it. I was in the room as you held to account members of previous administrations for not coming forward as they should have. So, look, in order to avoid our men and women in our armed forces going into harm's way, doubting whether they have the support of the Congress, consultation, hearings, and deliberations are required. I understand the risk of leaks. That's a risk every administration takes. But at the end of the day, our framers entrusted the power of the declaration of war to this body, not to the executive. And where there is the time to consult, there has to be consultation. Second, I just wanted to talk about allies and alliances. I was just in Europe. I led a bipartisan delegation, as Senator Shaheen referenced, to Denmark. And our president's comments about NATO, about Denmark, and his attempts to coerce Denmark into giving up Greenland are appalling. They profoundly harmed our security. And I am asking you to do everything you can to reinforce our commitment to NATO. I was concerned that you just said NATO needs to be reimagined. Let's just be clear about the record. You know as well as I, Article 5 has only been invoked once, and it was in defense of us after we were attacked. Danes and soldiers from almost every other NATO ally deployed and served, fought, and died. 52 days. And for me, the most emotional moment of my visit to Denmark was laying a wreath at the memorial to the Danes who served, fought, and died alongside Americans. So when our president says we never asked for anything from NATO, and they never gave us anything, and you suggest that they aren't carrying their weight, whether it's in bases, or in access, or in troops, or in service, it is allies that will keep us safe in the Indo-Pacific. Our treaty allies, Korea and Japan and Australia and the Philippines, are going to be critical to Indo-Pacific security against our principal threat, China, and in Europe. I'm worried that the very foundations of trust are being shaken. Our democracy depends on consultation with Congress that is truthful and timely, and the confidence of our allies depends on them knowing where we're going next. Today, an armada is steaming towards Iran. Our president is on social media threatening Iran, and I hope I can count on you, Mr. Secretary, to consult with us and inform us before our next actions, whether against Nigeria, Colombia, Cuba, Iran, or anywhere else. And I hope and believe that I can count on you to reinforce the sanctity of NATO, not to reimagine it, but to reinforce it.
Thank you. Well, let me unpack the 3 points you touched upon: consultation, NATO, Greenland, alliances in Greenland. Let me tell you on the consultation. Look, this has been a point of tension, not just in this administration and Congress, but in multiple administrations. As you rightly pointed out, I was a big fan of consultation when I was sitting over there. Now, you know, it's a different job, different time. But it's not, that's not necessarily the point. This is a very unique situation that we faced here. The fact of the matter is that our mission, and the one you were briefed on and talked about, that mission remains ongoing, and that is the counter-narcotic mission that we continue to carry out. As controversial as it may be, you may not all be fans of it, obviously, but it is happening in the Eastern Pacific, and it is also happening in the Caribbean Basin. The problem is, or the good news is, there aren't a lot of drug boats moving in the Caribbean Basin anymore, and that's what we had briefed Congress upon. This specific mission that you've talked about, one of the reasons why you rehearse it is to see if it's even feasible, to basically go to the president and say, is this something that's even an option on the table? The truth of the matter is that this mission could not have been briefed to Congress because it wasn't even in the realm of possible until very late in December, when all of our efforts to negotiate with Maduro had failed, and the president was finally presented these options and made these decisions. It was also a trigger-based operation. It may never have happened. It required a number of factors to all align at the right place at the right time in a very limited window, and it wasn't even clear if it was ever going to be possible. There's also the aspect which I do not control, and that is deference to the Department of War on operational security. Despite the fact that we had kept this quite constrained, the truth of the matter is that this was leaked. We now know it was leaked by a contractor at the Department of War that, had it been published, would have endangered the lives of people and/or would have probably canceled the ability to carry out the mission. So this is a real tension, and one that I'm doing the best I can to try to manage within the constraints of two things: operational security and also decisions being made. There are multiple contingencies for events all over the world, including some that none of us think were ever going to come to fruition. And in this particular case, one of the reasons why you rehearse these things in advance is to know whether it's even possible. Is this even doable? And what are the risks associated with doing? So you can present options to the president, who ultimately makes these decisions. In the case of reimagining NATO, it most certainly has to be reimagined. And the reason why it has to be reimagined is not because its purpose is reimagined. Its capabilities have to be reimagined. Let me give you as a point of example. There's a lot of talk about security guarantees. And it's something that there's general agreement about now with the case of Ukraine. But those security guarantees basically involve the deployment of a handful of European troops, primarily French in the UK, and then a U.S. backstop. But in fact, the security guarantee is the U.S. backstop. It is not and I'm not diminishing the fact that some countries in Europe are willing to place troops in a post-war Ukraine. What I'm pointing out is that is irrelevant without the U.S. backstop. And the reason why you need such a strong U.S. backstop is because our allies and our partners have not invested enough in their own defense capabilities over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully that is changing. And in some cases and in some particular countries, it's already changed. But this is a fact that we cannot ignore. NATO is going to be stronger if our allies are more capable, especially, and here's the reality, whether we want to accept it or not, we have interests all over the world. We have interests in the Middle East, we have interests in the Western Hemisphere, and we most certainly have interests in the Indo-Pacific. A number of you have already pointed out that China is the chief challenge. We can't have the same soldiers or the same ships in both Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. We have to pick. No matter how many ships we build, no matter how many capabilities we grow, we're going to have to make these adjustments. And the stronger our partners are in NATO, the more flexibility the United States will have to secure our interests in different parts of the world. That's not an abandonment in NATO. That is a reality of the 21st century and the world that's changing now. In the case of Greenland, I'll say we're in a good place right now. We had excellent meetings with the Secretary General of NATO. In fact, even as I speak to you now, there'll be some technical level meetings between us and our partners in Greenland and Denmark on this issue. And I think we have in place a process that's going to bring us to a good outcome for everybody. The President's interest on Greenland has been clear. It's a national security interest. It's a long-standing interest that predate this administration. It's one that our allies acknowledge is real. I think we're going to get something positive done. We're going to begin that process in a very professional, straightforward way. It begins today, and it'll be a regular process. We're going to try to do it in a way that isn't like a media circus every time these conversations happen, because we think that creates more flexibility on both sides to arrive at a positive outcome. And I think we're going to get there. And I thought it was noteworthy and important that despite your concerns, the President at his speech in Davos made very clear that the United States was not going to use force or military force in Greenland. So I think we're going to wind up in a good place. We got a little bit of work to do, but I think we're going to wind up in a good place. And I think you'll hear the same from our colleagues in Europe very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked.
Senator,
It is critical that you consult with Congress. For us to be safe, our allies have to trust us. And for this committee to do our work, we have to trust you. Let's work together to restore that.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator McCormick.
Here's what you need to know that puts this in context. According to NBC News, the CIA tracked Maduro's movements for months using someone close to him, and Delta Force built a fake version of his safe house to practice the operation. The operation was approved before Christmas, and the administration carried out attacks on drug trafficking boats starting in September 2025. So when Rubio says it wasn't even possible until very late in December and there wasn't time to talk with Congress, he's describing an operation that was literally being practiced for months with a full-scale copy of the target site. That's Coons' entire point. If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And here's the system Rubio is supposed to use but didn't. The Gang of Eight. It's 8 specific people in Congress, the House and Senate leaders from both parties, plus the chair and top member of each intelligence committee, who are chosen by law to receive briefings on the most secret covert operations. According to The Hill, the Trump administration didn't brief the Gang of Eight until after the operation had already started. Rubio's defense is that Congress leaks, but here's the thing about that claim. The Gang of Eight has literally never leaked, not once. That's not an exaggeration. There is no recorded case of the Gang of Eight leaking classified information in the entire history of its existence since 1981. You know what did leak? According to Rubio's own testimony, this operation leaked from a Defense Department contractor. So he didn't brief the 8 people who have never leaked anything because he was worried about leaks, and then it leaked anyway from his own department. Now, let's talk about what Rubio's really doing here, because it's not about operational security. The operation cost up to $1 billion between the raid and the ongoing naval blockade. An analysis from the Brookings Institution notes that Trump openly said the U.S. would run Venezuela until its oil systems are rebuilt, and we can safely hand Venezuela over to local authorities, which Trump told the New York Times could take much longer than a year. So this isn't a small strike to arrest a fugitive, which is what Rubio keeps calling it. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, constitutional scholars are clear that this operation violated the Constitution's requirement that Congress authorize acts of war because there was no imminent threat to U.S. troops or attack on the country. What we're watching is Rubio trying to defend an unauthorized war by calling it a law enforcement action, while at the same time admitting it was planned for months and might involve staying in Venezuela for an unknown amount of time. And here's the pattern you need to see. Trump is threatening Denmark, a NATO ally, over Greenland, while telling Fox Business that NATO allies stayed a little off the front lines in Afghanistan. But according to reporting from multiple outlets, Denmark lost 44 troops in Afghanistan, the highest loss rate for its size of any NATO country. The UK lost 457 soldiers. Canada lost 158. Poland lost 44. Article 5, NATO's shared defense rule, has been used exactly once in history, and it was to defend the United States after 9/11. Coons is making the point that when you insult the allies who fought and died for you and then skip Congress on military action, you're not just breaking normal procedures, you're destroying the trust that keeps us safe. When Rubio says NATO needs to be reimagined, what he means is NATO needs to accept that the United States will do whatever it wants, which is the opposite of an alliance. So when Coons says the Gang of Eight has never leaked and it is critical that you consult with Congress, he's giving Rubio and us the language to understand what just happened. According to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the outlook for U.S. interests in Venezuela remains unclear because aside from capturing Maduro, the same people are still running the government. On the institutional level, this is about whether Congress has any power left to limit presidential war-making. The Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war specifically because the founders feared presidents taking too much power. According to the Brennan Center, there was no immediate threat or attack before the Venezuela operation, which means Trump's authority to use force without Congress was limited to defensive actions that don't apply here. When Rubio claims he can skip Congress because this was law enforcement rather than war, he's creating a loophole that any future president can use to launch military operations against any country where we've charged someone with a crime. Think about that framework. We've charged people in Iran, in Russia, in China. Under Rubio's logic, those are all now possible targets for one-sided military strikes that Congress can't stop. And for what? Rubio says it's about arresting a drug trafficker, about pushing back against Chinese and Russian influence, about protecting the Western Hemisphere. But according to Trump's own press conference, as reported by Al Jazeera, he made clear that Venezuelan oil was a motivation for action in Venezuela, claiming money would go to U.S. oil companies and to the United States of America in the form of repayment. So we skipped Congress, pushed away our NATO allies, and set a rule that the president can invade countries alone for oil. And the guy selling us this plan is the same guy who attacked this exact behavior for 14 years from the other side of the table, except now that he's the one doing it, the rules somehow don't apply. Kind of like how Trump's entire first term was attacking nation building, and then his second term opened with him literally saying, "We're going to run Venezuela." Funny how that works. But here's what this isn't about. It's not about whether Maduro is bad, he is, or whether the operation worked, it did, or whether NATO allies should spend more on defense, that's debatable. Here's what it is about. We just watched a Secretary of State who spent 14 years demanding congressional consultation on military action, defend skipping Congress on an operation planned for months, using a claim about leaks that his own testimony disproves, while at the same time arguing that insulting our NATO allies and threatening to take their land is actually reimagining the alliance. What that reveals is an administration that sees laws, alliances, and constitutional checks as obstacles to get around rather than guardrails that keep us safe. And when Rubio says it's a different job, different time to brush off his complete flip on consultation, what he's really saying is the rules apply to other people but not to him. The darker reality? If you can skip the Gang of Eight, the 8 people who have literally never leaked, then congressional oversight doesn't exist anymore. And if congressional oversight doesn't exist, then we're one bad decision away from a war that nobody approved and everyone has to live with. At least when Ross said we were on a break, Rachel got to yell at him about it afterward. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more clear, straight-to-the-point analysis like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Your support helps keep independent media like this going, and it really makes a difference. Thanks for watching. Bye.